Hello and welcome to my second channel. We talk about how to attain language proficiency in any language in the fastest and most fun way possible. Now today I've got my top 10 tips on how to learn a language. But why should you listen to me? Well, I've been studying foreign languages for 15 years, I've got a degree and I speak several languages. Now, I don't want to waste your time, so I'll leave links in the description below where you can check my proficiency level in all the languages that I speak. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. Tip number 10, choose a culture that you like. Now, believe it or not, when I was a student at university, I noticed a lot of my classmates were sort of choosing languages, not necessarily because they liked those cultures, they didn't particularly like those countries, but they just did it because they were thinking of possible jobs or work opportunities. Now, even though that is important, of course, it's one of the possible ways to utilize these language skills that you are trying to get. That should absolutely not be your focus when you're choosing the language you want to learn. Depending on what language you study and where you're starting from, the number of hours that you're going to have to spend learning that language can become overwhelming if you don't also absolutely love the culture of that language. So if you have to decide between Italian and Japanese, if you absolutely love the Italian culture, you love Italian food, you've got Italian friends, you want to go to Italy, you want to speak to the people there, then I would absolutely choose Italian, even though from a business point of view, Japanese would be the better choice. That is because if you love Italy, then you will love spending a huge amount of hours into learning Italian, and that will ensure results. On the other hand, if you don't care about Japan or Japanese culture and subculture and pop culture and history, and you don't even care about the country and just doing it because you think it can give you better job opportunities, well, the problem is that you cannot gain those job opportunities if you don't become fluent in the first place, and you will not become fluent because you hate it. Now, on the other hand, if you do love Japanese history, culture, the sound of the language, the people, then absolutely go for Japanese. Number 9, correctly assess the difficulty level of a language. I think whenever students are trying to decide what language should I study, one of the first things they do is they type on Google, how difficult is this language? And then you've got these lists that tell you learning this language needs 2,000 hours of study, 500 hours of study, 1,000 hours of study, and then they select it according to these lists. And one of the problems with these lists is that they give you a rough idea, but the reason why they are not to be trusted that much is because very much depends on what language you speak. Now really think about it. If you are a Spanish speaker, that's your first language, you speak Spanish, then learning Italian, or French for that matter, is going to be a lot easier for you than if you were, say, Korean. Better yet, if you're an Anglophone, it's going to be easier for you to learn a European language than it will be to learn, say, Chinese with all the different characters and tones. If your first language is Japanese instead, well, you know the kanji are sort of different than compared to the Hansa, there are different ways to use them. Your mind is already used to that sort of system of writing and you already know a lot of the characters, so it will be a lot easier for you to learn Chinese than, say, for an Englishman. And in the same level, if you come from a tonal language, say you speak Thai or you speak Cantonese and you want to learn Mandarin, well, it's going to be a lot easier because you already know how tones work and your ears are already in tune with how a tonal language works. So difficulty very much has to do, first, with what your first language is, but second, with your level of experience in learning languages. So if you were brought up bilingual, it's going to be a lot easier for you to tackle another language because it's going to be your third. In fact, and that's something that I found really fascinating myself, is that my second language wasn't particularly difficult to learn, English, because my first language is Italian. I didn't find English too difficult to get to a point where I could be fluent enough to, say, make videos on YouTube or use it for work. Of course, it's not perfect, but perfection is not even attainable anyways. However, my third language, even though it was Japanese, it was actually easier for me to learn, I know, crazy, because I already had the experience of having reached fluency in another language. So if you come from a situation where in your house, in your home, in your family, you're used to switching languages, and it's going to be a lot easier for you because you've already got the pathways in your brain. Make sure to plan a trip to that country after at least 1 year. This is, again, another point that sometimes I see channels sort of mislead people because they give you this advice. They tell you you need to go to a foreign country as quickly as possible because that's the best way to learn. Now, absolutely. Going to another country. You're learning French, go to France. You'll learn it a lot quicker. But if you go to France when you have zero French, it might be overwhelming to the point that if you are an exchange student but you have no knowledge whatsoever of even the foundation and the basics of the language, then it could discourage you and you could quit. And in fact, it happens a lot. On the other hand, having a certain overall understanding of how the language works, of course you don't need to be fluent yet because that's what you're trying to achieve, which is the reason why you are moving to that country in the first place. But I think the best thing to do in this case is to study the language for at least 1 year. If you study the language for a year and you have an overall understanding of how the grammar works, you can make your first sentences, you're kind of used to the sounds of the language, your pronunciation is, you've been working on your pronunciation, you have a little experience, you've got some vocabulary, then you want to move to the country. And believe me, if you do that, give yourself 1 or 2 years and you will be fluent. Now, I know that some people will be like, whoa, 2 years? Well, it depends on the language again, because difficulty, as we said in the previous point, it's a difficult estimate. But absolutely, fluency can be reached, and if you move to a foreign country, you could pick it up as quickly as 6 months. But then you need to have a full year of preparation, and then is it going to take 6 months, 1 year, 2 years? It depends on the language. Interact with natives. I know that this can be daunting in the sense that it can be scary, to interact with natives and try to speak. Because what if they don't understand you? What if they say something and I don't understand? Well, of course, you need to do it at your own pace and everybody is different, but eventually you will have to interact with natives to the point that you'll have to maximize your ability to interact with natives of such language. So if you're learning Mandarin Chinese and you happen to go to a Chinese restaurant once a month, make it twice a month and try and order in Chinese. But of course, facing a native, like literally face to face, is probably the scariest thing. So it's not for everyone at first. You want to first, have some experience with the language. Well, then chat. Find a chat room in that language, and so you have time when they write, you can look it up, see if there are words you don't understand, put them back. It's a good idea to try and read it out loud though, because if you just write and read, that's what you're gonna get good at, writing and reading. So if you want to speak, you do want to be able to always sort of try to pronounce things out loud, but that's a good way to start getting familiar, getting some correction, some feedback. And then maybe try to have a little call. For you listening, watch movies, and we'll get back to that in the next point. But try to make sure that you always have interactions with natives, whether it be through the internet, physical, if you got friends, even better, bilingual friends. They are absolute treasures. And eventually, finding a little classroom where you can go and try and practice your language, maybe with a native teacher, that would be a great thing. Have fun while you're learning. Sometimes when we think, probably because of the way we've been brought up in school, but sometimes when we think, oh, I need to study, I need to learn, it's a boring thing. It's a really tedious process where I have to sit down at my desk with these books. I'd rather do anything else, like watching the grass grow, playing my games, watching Netflix, but no, I have to stay here and write these silly sentences, and goodness gracious, I'm gonna hate it. But it doesn't need to be like that. In fact, it shouldn't be like that. Learning a language should be fun, because when you learn while you're having fun, you are going to remember the majority of those things because they're going to be connected to memories in your brain. So one of the best ways to do this, I always play my video games. I'm a gamer. So if you're a gamer, you can do this. Switch the language in your games. Playing Skyrim, you love Oblivion, you love whatever game it is, King's Bounty. Well, switch it to the language you're learning, switch it to Italian, Chinese, French, German, and then play it, and you'll have plenty of opportunities to look for words. And of course you will learn, depending on the game you choose, you might learn words that don't really need that much of a priority. I mean, it's better to learn I'm hungry than to learn spear and shield. But then again, it's still extra vocabulary, it's still practice, and many of these games are even dubbed with professional voice actors that normally speak with a sort of accent-free pronunciation, and it's a great way. And then it doesn't have to be necessarily video games. Watch movies in the language. Make sure that you got your Netflix. Use it as a language experience. Find YouTube videos, watch them in the language. All of that is fun, and it plays a pivotal role in you not quitting because you're doing something you love in the language you're learning. Therefore, you're gonna love that language. Another point that is, I'm literally adamant about this one, but it's daily practice. Now, it doesn't matter how much you practice, in the sense that as long as you practice every day, you will see results. You will get better. On the other hand, people that tend to be busy, and let's face it, most of us are busy anyways. School, work, family, you don't have time to sit there for 4 hours every day. I understand it. If you do, great. I mean, when I was a full-time student, I did do like 8 hours a day, but I understand not everyone can do that. So the most important thing is to still, even if you can only do 30 minutes a day, an hour would be optimal, but if you can only do 30 minutes a day, that's actually better than just doing, say, one Monday you happen to be off and you do 6 hours of German and then you don't touch it for a week. That's not how our brain works. We are hardwired to memorize and retain information that is daily, repetitive. And that is because it's a way to tell your brain that you need that sort of information. And the brain doesn't discriminate between difficult words and easy words, in the sense that if you are a surgeon, then of course you're going to use very difficult words, but the only reason why you know them is because you use them all the time. There are really difficult words and easy words that are just less frequent and more frequent words. But if you ensure that every single day, no matter what, even if you have to do it for freaking breakfast and lunch break, and then a little bit in the evening before going to bed, make sure that it becomes a routine. It becomes a ritual. I always do something, little bit of listening, 15 minutes every day. Everyone has this time. Freaking do it in the toilet. I mean, you can use that time instead of watching TikTok, watch something in the language that you learn. 15 minutes, that's all it takes. And you will see much greater results than if you did 1 or 2 days with a lot of study, full afternoon, and then nothing for 2 or 3 days. That's not how it works. You need to maintain a continuous chain, or a chain of continuity. Next point, very brief: accept that you will make mistakes. I have spoken sometimes, including my uncle, to people that were like, unless I know that what I'm saying is 100% grammatically correct and perfectly pronounced, I don't speak. Well, here's the thing. Even natives don't speak in a perfect way. Of course, if very educated people do, but I'm saying when you're a child, then you're learning your own first language. You say things in silly ways and you pronounce things incorrectly, and oftentimes we are adults, but we must remember that as we are learning a language, we're going through the process of a child, which is why also reading, for example, child literature or books used for elementary school is a great way to pick up on vocabulary that it's naturally learned by children in school, that you of course bypass as an adult, watching cartoons and stuff like that. But on the other hand, it's important to understand that you will make mistakes, and in fact mistakes, or miss a mistake, is the best teacher of all, because when you make a mistake you remember it, and even if it was awkward, and hopefully it won't be, because I mean, you're going to make a mistake, so what? You're speaking a second language, and perhaps the person you're speaking to doesn't. Maybe they only speak the language that you're targeting, your target language. So then again, it's absolutely fine. But even if you make a mistake and it was a little awkward because people misunderstood you, you'll absolutely remember it, which means that if you make, the more mistakes you make, the more you will remember. So treat mistakes as a great way to learn. The next point, I cannot stress enough how important it is. Tackle pronunciation early on. I've noticed students, including students of languages that absolutely rely on pronunciation, such as Mandarin Chinese, but this really works with anything. I've seen students that are like, nah, I'm just going to learn the words, I'm just going to learn the grammar, I'm just going to make sure that I speak, when who cares about the pronunciation, I'm not native anyway. Well, studying pronunciation doesn't mean that you're trying to sound like a native. Now, some people do, and if you find it as something that it's fun, like something that sort of tickles your interest, and you're like, yeah, I want to try to sound as native as possible, then absolutely do it. But it's not 100% necessary. You can keep or retain a little bit of a foreign accent as long as it doesn't impede communication. So if you are speaking your language and you want to try and pronounce it the closest possible to, I want to suggest a standardized version of that language, but then not necessary, in the sense that not everyone needs to speak with a standard accent. If you've got friends from a certain area or family members from a certain area, you want to speak like them, that's fine too, it's your option. With that being said, pronunciation is important, because pronunciation is the key for understanding and being understood. In the sense that if you mispronounce things, I've noticed people say this a lot, oh, they're pretending, for example, the French, the English, they just pretend not to understand you. They did understand me, but it's just because I didn't pronounce it perfectly. No, actually, a lot of people won't recognize the words if you change them too much. You might think that you're pronouncing it correctly, but in reality, you are pronouncing it in a way still too linked to the way you produce sounds in your own language, and those sounds, bear in mind, are considered to be alien sounds in the receiving language, and therefore they could create a real barrier. And therefore, again, you don't need to lose your accent entirely, but at least make sure that you gain early on some mastery of how the sounds work. This way you will be easier to understand for other people. And on the other hand, if you get used to how people pronounce, then you will understand them better, because otherwise you might not recognize a word, because if you have read it tog your entire life, when you hear tough, you have no idea what they're on about. Use subtitles correctly. Subtitles are a great way to learn and master languages, but people often use them incorrectly. I've seen people doing, basically they're watching a movie in English, for example, and they put subtitles, say, in Italian, which is their first language. But when you do that, you're not really studying. You're just enjoying the original sound of the actors, which I guess can help a little bit with pronunciation, so it's not complete waste of time. But oftentimes the subtitles are not a perfect one-to-one translation, and also ubi maior minor cessat, as they say in Latin, meaning that when you're reading in your own language, you're completely shutting off everything that has to do with your second language because you don't need it. And it's all about need when it comes to language proficiency and skills. So if you are watching a movie in English because you're learning English, then you should keep the subtitles in English. And that's a great way to learn vocabulary and understand how natives pronounce it. And then you can go back, read it again, write down some notes. What about completely removing subtitles? Well, that's actually a great exercise, but it's a different exercise. So if you do it, you need to do it because you know what you're doing. If you remove subtitles, you're scaling up the difficulty level of that exercise exponentially, which can be difficult for beginner students. So if you're a beginner, I wouldn't suggest you to do that too much. You can do it a little bit, but it can be frustrating. So what sort of exercise is it? Well, when you work with subtitles in language, so again, you're watching Italian and put subtitles in Italian, then that helps you with pronunciation and vocabulary. But if you remove the subtitles completely, you're working on your ability to understand. So your listening skills, and always pronunciation. So they're two different exercises, and they should be treated as such. So if you want to do today, I'm just gonna watch a movie on Netflix, well then watch perhaps 20 minutes with subtitles on, and then go back and rewatch maybe the first 10 minutes without subtitles on. You've done two completely very effective different exercises. Now, at this time, I try to watch everything without subtitles, but that's because I've had over again a decade, almost 15 years of experience in language learning, so I know I'm not going to give up. The more confident you are, the more success you see, the longer your sessions without subtitles should be in your target language. It's a tough exercise, but if you can get to the point where you're watching 1 hour every day, no subtitles, your ability to understand natives and native-like speed will improve dramatically. As the last point, last but not least, understand that learning a language is like climbing a mountain. Now, this is a sort of picture, mental visualization that can really help us understand how language learning works. And again, I've done this multiple times, and I know that it works like this with any language that I've tried. It really works for everyone. When you start learning a language, it's as if you're going up a mountain. So of course, when you come from a flat ground, you're not learning anything, and then you start tackling language learning, it's really tough. Going up, very hard, and the higher you go, the harder it gets to keep climbing. And this is where a lot of people give up. What they don't know is that this happens in the sense that after a while, in my experience, usually a year, but it kind of depends on the language and the person, can happen as soon as 6 months, or it might take a little longer. At one point in your language learning, you will reach the peak. Reaching the peak of the mountain doesn't mean that you're fluent yet. It just means that you've got to the point where you have learned enough that from now on, it's all going to be downhill. People don't know that this happens, and it happens every single time. And when this happens, then what was really hard once is going to become super easy. Like, for example, right now I'm in a situation where both with Japanese, with English, of course, whenever I'm learning stuff, it's easy because I've already gained enough experience and enough vocabulary and, mostly, yes, experience with the language. And now it's just a piece of cake compared to when I first started learning these languages. Now, how can you know when you are at the peak? Here is the secret, the final tip. You know that you have reached the peak, and from now on, it's going to be downhill when the moment you are talking to someone, having a conversation or watching a movie, you are not counting, oh, look, I've understood 3, I've understood 5 words, I've understood 15 words of their entire conversation. It's when you start counting the number of words you didn't understand. So you go, okay, I understood everything except for those 3. I understood everything except for the first half. Or I understood everything except for maybe 10, 15 words. Then you know you've reached the peak. From now on, it's all going to be downhill. Okay, well, number one, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up and make sure to subscribe for more language-related content. And thank you very much for watching.